Now I want you to stop and think with me. How many times have you ordered a ride or gotten into a taxi thinking it would be just another peaceful ride home? After all, we live surrounded by technology, convenience, and the deceptive sense of security. But what if, in a simple taxi ride request, your worst nightmare was waiting for you in the front seat? That's exactly what happened to Ashley Collins. On a rainy night in Boston, she left a regular party, ordered a car like she had done so many times before, and within minutes, realized that the driver was not who he said he was. What was supposed to be a 15-minute ride turned into the beginning of a desperate escape for her life and the discovery of a mystery that had haunted other women for years. Today, you will learn the true and impressive story of courage, resilience, and humanity that begins with a simple taxi ride and ends by revealing one of the most terrifying crimes ever documented in the United States. I guarantee you, after hearing this story, you will never look at a night run the same way again. On a rainy night in Boston, where the lights reflected on the wet sidewalk like small beacons of hope, Ashley Collins was finishing another ordinary day at work. She was a designer, young, full of dreams, and carrying in her chest that mix of hope and insecurity that so many of us have felt when trying to make our own space in the world. The get-together at the restaurant had been pleasant, filled with laughter, office jokes, and a little wine. But now the clock was almost midnight. The subway was closed, and the rain insisted on turning every step into a challenge. She picked up her cell phone and, with the same confidence that thousands of people have every day, ordered a taxi through an app. Minutes later, a black car approached the sidewalk like a discreet shadow under the damp glow of the streetlights. Unaware that fate was preparing a test of courage and resilience that few would endure, Ashley got into the back seat. She was wearing the navy blue overcoat her grandmother had given her, a small amulet of affection and protection, as if the past wanted to offer her one last hug before the chaos. The driver, wearing a low cap and unshaven, didn't even greet her. He just nodded slightly when she told him her home address. In the silence of the car, Ashley allowed herself to relax for a few minutes, thinking about the small victories of the week, without realizing how much everything was starting to go off the rails. But soon the feeling of comfort gave way to a strange discomfort. The streets, once so familiar, began to disappear from the windows, as if the scenery was slowly changing before her eyes. The route was not the usual one. The familiar signs were left behind, and in place of the illuminated buildings, now appeared deserted avenues flanked by tall trees that seemed to block out the sky. A chill ran down her spine. Fear, that old friend of humanity, began to whisper in Ashley's ear, a familiar whisper. Something is wrong. Little did she know that the real battle, the one that would test her courage, resilience, and faith, had just begun. As the car drove along the increasingly deserted streets, the silence became unbearable. Ashley, trying to break the tense atmosphere, tried to start a conversation. She commented on the rain, asked if the driver worked late, made a light joke or two, but no answer came. Only that dense silence, loaded with something she could not describe, but that her instinct screamed not to ignore. It is curious how the human mind, in moments of fear, resorts to the most primitive of alerts, that of self-preservation. The understanding that something was deeply wrong began to settle like a cold fog in her chest. Ashley, with courage disguised as calm, looked away to her cell phone, her possible safety anchor. But the app no longer showed the current route. The route had disappeared from the screen. She tried to refresh it, but realized that she had no signal, not even a bar. There, isolated in a moving car, she felt fear growing, fueled by the insecurity of the unknown. There were no buildings around anymore, just the dark road and a corridor of trees like dark sentinels. What had previously been just an ordinary race now took on the contours of a real nightmare. The radio was off, the GPS turned off, the absolute silence of the driver, Everything seemed calculated to increase the tension. That silence was a silent scream. Ashley began to observe the details more closely. The identification badge was covered with black tape, hiding the information. The smell in the car was strange, a mixture of cheap perfume and something metallic. Every little detail made the fear more palpable. Her heart was pounding, cold sweat was running down the back of her neck, and in her mind, the same phrase kept repeating, "Don't panic, think, observe, survive." And it would be exactly this inner wisdom that would begin to guide her in the next step. The road, now full of winding curves and completely devoid of street lighting, seemed like an endless maze. Fear was no longer a whisper in Ashley's mind, but a deafening scream that echoed inside her chest. With her heart beating wildly, she gathered all her courage and asked out loud, "You're going the wrong way. This is not the route." Still, the driver remained silent, his eyes fixed on the road, his hands firmly on the steering wheel, as if he were deaf to her words or were purposefully ignoring her. This was no longer just strange. It was terrifying. With a quick movement of her eyes, Ashley realized something crucial. The door locks were engaged, and the electronic panel indicated that the central control was locked. There was no point in trying to open them manually. Panic, mixed with the will to survive, activated an almost animal instinct. She needed to think quickly, but clearly. This was the moment when emotional resilience became her greatest asset. She remembered her mother's advice, always full of wisdom. If one day you feel that you are in danger, keep a cool head. Fear makes many get lost before their time. It was then that she noticed the most frightening detail. The identification badge on the dashboard, which should have shown the driver's name and license, was intentionally covered by black tape. There was no identity, no record, just a deliberate emptiness. Ashley felt the weight of that brutal honesty. She was in front of someone who did not want to be found. The initial fear now gave way to the urgent need to formulate a plan, because with each kilometer, the city and its lights became distant memories. And in the midst of this route to the unknown, the real game of survival was just beginning. When the asphalt road gave way to a narrow dirt path, Ashley felt the weight of fear turn into pure terror. The trees now formed dense tunnels, muffling any possibility of rescue. The sound of tires on dry gravel sounded like a countdown clock. But amidst that overwhelming darkness, her mind remained active, clinging with all its strength to the understanding that, in order to survive, she would need to be more strategic than the predator itself. There, where many would give in to despair, a flame of hope and courage was born in her. With almost instinctive speed, Ashley pretended to receive a call. She raised the cell phone to her ear, even though there was no signal, and began to speak loudly. "Hi honey, I'm coming. Mike is already waiting for me at the gate with the dog, okay? I'll see you in 2 minutes." The fictitious name, the mention of the supposed companion and the animal were calculated attempts to induce the driver to fear being caught. But his silence remained intact. A few minutes later, the car made a sharp turn and stopped abruptly. There, lit only by the taillights, was an old pickup truck parked in front, its headlights off a scene that seemed like something out of one's worst nightmares. Time froze. The driver reached toward the passenger seat and grabbed something that Ashley couldn't immediately make out. It looked like a piece of fabric or a ribbon. Her brain no longer allowed room for pure fear. Now it was just survival. With precise movements, she dropped her body to the side, feigning a sudden fainting spell. When the man opened the back door to check, Ashley exploded into action. With all the strength in her legs, she kicked him hard, hitting him in the chest. The impact knocked him off balance, creating the space she needed to escape and run into the woods, driven by adrenaline and the faith that there was still a chance to live. The dense forest seemed like a living maze, where branches cut her skin and roots tried to pull her down with every step. But the fear of falling was less than the fear of being captured. Ashley ran guided by a primitive survival instinct where resilience and hope served as fuel even when her body was already showing signs of exhaustion. Behind her, voices echoed, mixed with the rustling of the leaves. The driver was not alone. For a few seconds that seemed eternal, she felt that fear was about to take over her completely. But she took a deep breath, repeating mentally, "Courage, Ashley, courage." Not knowing exactly where she was going, she fixed her gaze on any light that appeared in the darkness. And there, in the distance, like a beacon of affection sent by fate, appeared a small wooden house with an illuminated porch. The sight of that simple light rekindled in her the confidence that was beginning to fade. Staggering, she ran to the door and knocked loudly, her breath coming in short gasps, her face marked by scratches. When the door opened, an elderly woman with kind eyes named Helen greeted her with compassion and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Without hesitation, Helen pulled Ashley inside, locked the doors, and called the police. As the young woman trembled with fear and shock, Helen offered her hot tea and words full of kindness. "You are now safe, my daughter." Ashley could barely respond, but that brief touch of humanity was like an invisible hug, helping her contain her panic. The kindness of this stranger symbolized the power of kindness in its purest form, a simple gesture, but capable of altering the course of history. And as the sirens echoed in the distance, a new chapter in this dark adventure was about to unfold. Even with the doors locked and the police on their way, Ashley's heart was beating like a wild drum. Helen, with an almost maternal sweetness, tried to comfort her, offering blankets and words of hope. But fear still dominated every fiber of Ashley's body because the real danger seemed to be lurking outside. The porch lights swayed in the wind, creating dancing shadows that resembled hidden threats. It was as if the silence of the early morning carried an unbearable weight, a reminder that the battle for life was not yet completely over. When the police arrived, the tension in the air was palpable. Ashley, still in a state of shock, recounted in detail everything she could see: the black car, the driver wearing a cap, the tape covering the badge, the tortuous path, and the exact place where she managed to escape. Helen, with her wisdom and serenity, told something that left the investigators even more uneasy. That was not the first time someone had knocked on her door in despair. According to her, in recent years, people in similar situations had already appeared asking for help in the early hours of the morning, a dark pattern that few wanted to believe was real. The police, now armed with a bigger picture than they had initially imagined, decided to isolate the area and begin an intensive search in the region. Ashley's story was taking on the contours of something much bigger. She had not been an isolated victim, but rather part of a web of mysteries that had been unfolding for years. And even under police protection, as she tried to sleep that night, under Helen's welcoming roof, Ashley knew, with brutal clarity, that she had escaped something much more perverse than an occasional kidnapping. The true dimension of that nightmare would only begin to emerge from that moment on. As dawn slowly illuminated the tense scene, the investigation began to gain momentum. The search teams meticulously searched the area where Ashley had jumped from the car and fled through the woods. It was there, among exposed roots and trampled leaves, that they found the first clues: deep tire tracks, male footprints, and further on, a container camouflaged under a worn tarp. Upon opening the container, the scene that emerged was heartbreaking and caused an internal commotion in all the agents present. Inside were personal objects of women who had disappeared over the past 5 years. Bracelets, necklaces, broken cell phones, diaries, and even small children's shoes, each item carrying interrupted stories, echoes of loneliness and suffering. For Ashley, the discovery was an additional shock. Not only had she survived, but it also revealed a possible network of crimes that had escaped the eyes of the authorities for years. This was no longer just about her, but about many other victims who did not have the same chance to escape. The altruism that guided her now made her cooperate with the investigations courageously, even under the emotional pressure of revisiting painful details. Her sincerity in her statements, her perseverance in the face of fear, and her compassion for the unknown victims inspired the police not to rest until the case was solved. However, the criminal's trail seemed to vanish into thin air. The vehicle used was not registered in any records. The name used in the app, Robert Lane, simply did not exist in the databases. Transport companies came under national pressure due to flaws in their driver verification protocols. Ashley's case began to gain repercussion in the media, fueling debates about security, urban loneliness, and digital vulnerabilities. But even with the task force mobilized, the identity of the attacker remained hidden, like a ghost slipping through the cracks in the system. And what was yet to come would bring a twist as unexpected as it was disturbing. The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster for Ashley. Even under police protection, with psychologists by her side and the support of her family, fear seemed to stick to her skin. Every sound of a car at night, every ring on her cell phone, every step alone on the street rekindled the panic. The emotional loneliness was profound, and insecurity still hung like a gray cloud over her mind. But inside her, a spark of resilience also sprouted. Ashley knew she didn't want to be defined only as a victim, but as someone who, with courage and hope, survived and chose to rewrite her story. Guided by this inner strength and by a sincere compassion for other women who never had a voice, Ashley created a blog called Carita Segura Safe Race. In it, she recounted her experience in detail, offered practical safety tips and guidance for those who used ride-hailing services. The honesty with which she shared her trauma touched thousands of readers. People from different parts of the country began sharing similar stories and thanking her for the inspiration she provided. Thus, what began as an episode of fear and loneliness became a community of support and awareness. Ashley's story quickly went beyond the internet, making national news, TV shows, and public debates about digital security and passenger rights. New legislation began to be proposed, requiring companies to adopt stricter verification measures. As she saw the fruits of her struggle gain ground, Ashley finally found a way to channel her trauma into wisdom and the power to transform. There were still scars, it's true. Nightmares would come back from time to time. But now her pain also carried gratitude, not for having suffered, but for having survived, and above all, for having transformed that nightmare into inspiration for thousands of other people. Time passed, but Ashley's case remained alive in the minds of investigators and in the collective curiosity of the country. Until, almost a year after the event, chance, or perhaps the power of kindness working silently, provided an unexpected clue. A retired police officer, on a morning walk along a forgotten rural road near the place where Ashley escaped, saw the remains of a partially burned vehicle camouflaged under dense vegetation. His old police instinct alerted him there was something bigger than it seemed. Forensics were called in. Inside the charred car, they found human remains, an old driver's badge, and traces of partially destroyed documents. The fingerprints still preserved revealed a shocking identity. Thomas Reed, a former taxi driver accused of violent assaults in the 1990s, officially declared dead in 1992 after faking his own death. He had lived in the shadows for decades, assuming new identities and exploiting loopholes in the system. His disappearance strategy, marked by inverted altruism, a perverse selfishness, allowed him to go unnoticed while collecting victims. In the darkness with the revelation, the puzzle began to fit together in a macabre way. The police linked Reed to other unsolved disappearances, discovering a dark trail that spanned years and entire states. Ashley, without knowing it, had been the last piece of this web of horrors, and the first to escape alive. The authorities were now presenting the evidence to the public, closing a chapter that brought fear, but also provoked deep reflection on security, trust, and humanity. Still, even with the truth exposed, the impact of that nightmare still reverberated, silently in Ashley's mind, preparing the ground for her greatest inner battle, living after having been over. Ashley's life changed irreversibly. Even though she now lives in a different city, with a new routine and more security, the silence of the dawn never had the same meaning again. Every headlight that passed through the window, every distant sound of tires on the asphalt rekindled fragments of the fear that lived inside her. Insecurity still made unexpected visits on sleepless nights, when the subconscious relived the minutes when hope seemed fragile. But at the same time, what flourished was a silent strength, sustained by resilience, self-love, and reconciliation with one's own vulnerability. The documentary about her story, broadcast on national television, not only moved millions, but also became a turning point in the creation of new public safety policies for ride-hailing. Her individual struggle became a beacon of inspiration and compassion for thousands of people, mainly women, who began to organize themselves, creating networks of mutual protection. Ashley saw, with humility and gratitude, the real impact of her story, not as a personal trophy, but as a reminder of how altruism and courage can transform tragedies into opportunities for collective change. There are still nights when she wakes up scared, swearing she heard the sound of brakes on the street. At these times, hold tightly the hand of the one you love and take a deep breath, remembering that, despite your fear, you overcame the abyss and rebuilt your life. Because the true victory, in the end, was not just escaping, it was the daily decision to live with honesty, confidence, and the wisdom acquired through pain. And so, the silence of the dawn continues to exist, but now it also carries the strength of those who have learned to master it. Now answer me honestly. How many times have you blindly trusted in routine? How many times have you gotten into a car, walked down a street, or done something ordinary without imagining that the unexpected could be lurking around the corner? Ashley Collins' story is not just about fear. It is a powerful reminder of our vulnerability, but above all, of human strength in the face of abyss. Ashley could have been just another number in a cold statistic. But her courage, her ability to act even in the face of absolute fear, and her decision to transform trauma into purpose are examples of resilience that touch us all deeply. This story speaks of hope, compassion, humanity, and how the power of kindness, like the gesture of that lady, Helen, can be the difference between the end and a new beginning. Now, I want to challenge you. Are you prepared to be the best version of yourself when the unexpected knocks on your door? Are you building the inner strength necessary to face your own challenges? If this story touched you, leave a comment below. Share it with someone you want to protect, and of course, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to continue following stories that transform lives, because the world is full of stories like this, and each one of them carries lessons that can, indeed, change the course of our own journey.